Nice to see you. And actually, our panel looks a lot different than advertised. I replace Christine Lang. Then we have Maya. Come on stage, please.
I'm the same old.
I probably don't really have to introduce her, not just because she just hold the key speaker note here, but because she's like really famous and just a really cool researcher for transformation and the author of the bestseller Unsere Welt neu denken. And she's just working on another book, right? And what I really liked about your self-presentation for the Republika is that you said that you really trying to understand why we as a society don't build the world as we as individuals want it to be, and that you're always interested in interlinking like practice and theory. So thanks and welcome, Maya.
Thank you, Sarah.
And our second guest is Andrea Vetter. Please come on stage. She's a transformation researcher as well. And she's interims professor at the Hochschule für Bildende Künste in Braunschweig and teaches transformation design. She is also one of the founders of the Culture and Community Center Haus des Wandels in Brandenburg. And she also works in the editorial team of the magazine Oya, you might know it. And she is also the co-author of the book The Future is Degrowth, what we want to talk about today. And this will be out at the end of the month, at June 28th, and she's replacing Matthias Schmelzer, who unfortunately caught COVID and couldn't be here today, and Tony Norshin, who we wanted really badly to have in this talk, also catch the cold and just had to cancel this morning. So it's the three of us, but I think it will be enough, and
many others.
Yeah, and many others, and that's what I wanted to say directly at the start. So we're just like gonna start a little to dive into it, but you can really ask questions. So you can already think about what are you interested in, and I will open this up very quickly, and then we have two people just like going around with the microphone. So maybe this is a good reminder to just switch off your cell phones. And as we said, I'm a journalist and author, and I was really looking forward to moderating this panel as well, because I rarely get the chance to speak to two so well-versed experts in this field. And today our topic is economic growth isn't working, and it cannot be made to work. Degrowth or post-growth has recently emerged to analyze how growth conceals rising inequality and ecological destruction, and propose desirable alternatives to it. So let's discuss. Where can we see the first steps? What can we learn from them? And how can we kickstart transforming our whole global economy? And maybe for a start, let's just be brutally honest. Like 2 years ago, I wouldn't have shown up to listen to this panel because actually, I thought that you guys are very sympathetic, but maybe ideologically influenced people who say like that degrowth is a thing and that growth won't work, and this might be well-meaning and sound interesting and good, but it's just not very realistic from my standpoint like 2 years ago. So what would you say in a few sentences to convince my former self that we not only have to talk about degrowth or post-growth, but just really start transforming the economy now? Who wants to start? That's maybe not so easy. Maya, you might be more trained in this.
Okay, in the discourses where I come from, there is a distinction made between post-growth and degrowth, where the post-growth people say, let's just be agnostic to whether GDP will rise or no, but let's be very clear in the analysis that the strategies right now that we are pursuing in order to have GDP rise are absolutely detrimental to having our ecosystems stay intact, or also to not over-exhausting people by now. So the running down, if we talk about economics, of social and human and environmental capital, which is the essence of humans and our environment. So an economy should serve their well-being, deliver on their development, rather than downgrading them. And this is why the notion of growth as measured in GDP is a wrong one, because it doesn't tell us much about the quality and what happens underneath the counting of money. And this is where it starts from. And then you have different analyses about the main drivers that push us into the overexploitation of those forms of capital. I found it was easier with the post-growth, and I would see myself there, because I don't mind if a thing that we call GDP in the future goes up and down, because it's a fabricated number. We can change the way we measure it all the time. But the notion that we should pursue ever more for everyone all the time faster as a cultural notion, I think this is what the degrowth picks out more than the post-growth camp, is one thing I would also call into question.
Okay, so Andrea, what do you think?
Now I could say two things, like start with the post-growth, degrowth debate, but I think we'll do it a bit later. Maybe I first want to answer to your former self, like, is it realistic what you're talking about? I think I would just ask back, like, why the hell do you think that this lifestyle you pursue and this economy we are seeing now is realistic to go on for 5 years, for 10 years, for 20 years? It's the most unrealistic thing ever. So everybody who says that could be happen, I mean, he's a kind of a weird utopian, or some other person who thinks that, like, on a finite planet we can have infinite growth, which just won't happen. So I think it's very important to turn the question around to all these people out there saying that we could go on as it was before, because we can't.
Well, yeah, I think that. But I think I heard both of this like very often in the past, and I read about it. It sounds really logical and stuff, but you just think like, okay, but they wrote it like in the 1972, was it? That we know it can't go on, but we just like pretend, and till now it kind of works, was my illusion. And for me it was that in the moment I realized how bad the climate crisis is, and that it's like much worse than I did realize before. Even in this moment, when people approached me and told me like, okay, you should have a look at post-growth ideas for a solution and something, I was still like, nah, I can't really afford to be shaken in my convictions even more, because like the climate crisis like really already had my ideas of the world and my life collapsing, and then somebody comes and tells me, okay, growth can't work, and it's like, okay, but we just like always see every few years that there's an economic crisis if we don't have growth anymore. So what would you tell people? Like, is there a way to transform to a post-growth, a degrowth economy without total confusion or collapse or something?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, you mentioned the year 1972. This was, I think, 50 years ago. I'm counting right. It was the Stockholm conference, like the first conference where a lot of people from, not all nations, but a lot of nations came together to tackle environmental problems. And since then, like a lot of very dedicated people have negotiated in a lot of different conference cycles to tackle environmental problems, and also the climate crisis, which was then not even consensus scientifically, which came on top of all the other environmental crises we witnessed then, like 50 years ago. I mean, not we sitting here, but like people older than us. And so we see that it just didn't work. I mean, there so many dedicated people. I really have like the deepest respect for all of them dedicating their life to finding some sentences in some treaties, you know, like they really fought for this like years and years in their offices, which is really hard work. But they didn't it didn't have the effect it should have, because now all these resource problems, all the emissions, everything is much, 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 much worse than 50 years ago. And this is because at the same time, other people in other offices were pursuing like the policies of economic growth, which totally undermines the environmental policies. And we can see, like in all these years, that only the resource extraction and the emissions go back when there is a big, like you said, recession. Mm-hmm. And because there is no such thing like decoupling, which is the myth of green capitalism. They say, okay, we can decouple the growth, the economic growth, from the resource use, which a lot of numbers show, a lot of studies show that it is not possible. It simply isn't. And it isn't in the fastness than it should, than it would be necessary, you know? And so, yeah, we come to the point that, but recession is so bad for people, what we've seen in 2008-9, in Greece, for example, or at a lot of places in the world. It's really a mess under capitalistic circumstances to be in a recession, especially for the poorest people, especially for women, especially for black people, for indigenous people, for all people who are not very privileged. And so, like, the only logic conclusion is that if, for physical reasons, to keep this planet a habitable one for humans, we have to degrow our economy, and degrowth under the circumstances of capitalism means a lot of problems for a lot of people. We just can't go on with this economic system. It's very logic. We need a post-capitalist system. But that is, of course, a big thing to say. And we will discuss later how we can go there, right?
Probably. Maya, what would you say?
Yeah, I've come to try to avoid the big laden terms. So generally, I try to avoid using the term growth altogether, because I think it is exactly what is hidden underneath that is the most interesting thing. And what you're talking about when we talk about economics, when we talk about it's a relationship, it's always relationship. It's the relationship between people and nature or the habitat in order to create and produce and distribute the things and the services that we deem necessary for our living well together. And you can organize it in all different ways. And this is why I think it is so important to say, not to say whether something grows or it doesn't grow. When we're talking about these things, we wouldn't ever possibly use the term more is always better for what we're describing. So if we just vet the frame and say, what are you talking about? Is that kind of activity, for example, we've had 20% of GDP in biotech now. It was great that it could happen because it created a lot of alleviation for a crisis. Yes, but then again, you would say it's not necessarily what you call progress, is it? And we always think of growth as being something that we're getting into a better state of our society. No. We had to waste so much. We still have a lot of waste in our faces right now to protect ourselves from something that we could have avoided possibly jumping into the human population in the first place had we not destroyed their habitat as much because of the carriers of the virus not being able to live far away enough from humans anymore because we're cutting into their living spaces. So it's a regrettable. That's how you talk about it. It's unfortunate that the flooding now in Germany, where we have to put a lot of resources in now, a lot of people working on it, to restore an entire village and places where people died because of a flooding. And that is not how I would think about progressing societies. And this is why I try to avoid labeling anything as growth, but trying to say, what is the qualitative development that we're after? And then we talk about human capital, more of it all the time. Like, why is that better? including education. If I get the totally wrong education in my head, and lots of it, it won't help me become an agent in the current situation to collaborate with others to find solutions to the problems. Social capital, it's good relationships, it's trust, it's effective institutions that help us coordinate. More and more of them, I think. In Germany, we're quite good at over-bureaucratizing stuff, so everybody feels suffocated, but not very effectively collaborating anymore. So we should have less of it, if it is not the quality that we need. And it needs a lot of trust. So trust, yes, needs to grow. But in the desperate search for who's going to be left behind and who can participate when the resources get scarce, we're starting to downgrade the trust and the relationships of bringing everybody on board even more. And we need to regrow our environmental base. It's the best thing to do to create freedom. And this is why it doesn't help to, I think, get confused and get antagonistic with each other with a terminology that doesn't tell us what we're actually talking about in the first place. But make everybody say, what do you mean when you use the term? Because then we can start talking, and then we can talk about what should regrow, what should degrow, what we might completely get rid of, and how we can move forward to something that we call progress.
Yeah. To be honest, I maybe hoped for some kind of reenactment of your little speech from the Bundespressekonferenz, where you really clearly explain that we really just crossed so many boundaries and that we just are about to just tipping points. And this was, for me, the moment I just realized, okay, you're not like the ideological guys or the well-meaning whatever, but that, it's just like logical that we're not only in the climate crisis, but that we are in many other ecological crises as well, and we might be able to decouple the emissions and growth, but maybe not fast enough, and we can't really decouple like the resource use, as you said. And that was a moment I just realized, okay, we want to just find the solutions for all this ecological crisis we're in. We just have to stop overusing resources now. And this was like the moment where I was sold that I really should have a look into post-growth. And I'm always emphasizing this point, and I love to talk about personal tipping points, because I just want to show that it's not like you're any sage or something, that you just always knew that that's the right way and the others are wrong or something, but it's really like, yeah, maybe you are, but it's more like a process of understanding, of questioning. And there's just one more question about this. I would like to ask you to, how did you get on working on post-growth or ideas, or how did you just realize, okay, I can't do what I did before, or the others do, or whatever? Do you have any answer on that?
For me, it was a lesson in economics, because I was trying to figure out why we're not bringing about the societies that we, like all the ones I talk to, want. And so I went into media and communication studies, because I thought maybe slimmer to use Sarah writing books and becoming journalists. We have to just tell people more about it and it'll happen. And then slowly but surely I went into psychology, sociology, political science, and wanted to understand why the different messages come through or not through, and how we're sending them, and how are they being distorted, and why does it still seem to be that we're being ignorant to those messages. And so I went into macroeconomics. And it was the people that were completely excluded from what I was told this was the way to look at the world that made me stumble first, because it was some theorem about trade and why it was always beneficial if people would migrate from one country to the other if they were earning a bit more here. And then this is why it's good to have free migration of labor everywhere to the benefit of everyone. And there was no costs involved. So if there was low employment in countries and they had to leave their countries, in total, the economic equation would say, hey, that's cost-free, and they're better off over there because they earn 50 cents more. And so I just was really puzzled. I mean, me being that person from the kind of social science saying, hold it, how can you say there's no cost involved? I mean, people have to uproot their families or go away, don't see them, have to go to a different place, can't help their own communities, and there's no cost occurring in your model. And he looked at me, and first, all the other students were a bit kind of what the hell is she doing there? And then he came back to me after a bit of a silence and said, oh, I hear a warm heart speaking. I was like, huh? And so I said, sorry, I didn't quite get your answer to my question. And that was the moment where everybody else's jaws dropped and his assistant got really kind of disquieted about the situation. And I thought, something's really screwed up in our educational system. More of that's not good, certainly not. And I have to understand why economics is taught this way, because it blinds us to everything I would say is the essence of how we live well together. So that was my inauguration, to say I want to understand the history of economic thought, what was getting institutionalized, why, who was promoting it, and then you end up being a political economist because you can't stay blind to power and interest anymore if you open up to the history of thought.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that I just recently, in the last 2 years, had very often these moments of being puzzled about something that everybody else thinks it's normal. And I just found out that you're maybe right when you have this feeling. So just like to encourage you to start discussions when you feel like this. Do you have... Do you have an answer to this? How did you end up researching degrowth?
Yeah, well, I tried to speak not too long. I think it was after I finished school, I did a job training, like I was working for 2.5 years when I was about 20. And I realized at the end of these 2.5 years, I will never, ever want to work again 40 hours a week, 9 to 5, because it really like sucks the life out of me, and it sucks the life out of everybody around me that I saw doing that for decades. And so I thought, okay, what to do then? I went to university. And yeah, but there, it was really interesting. I studied cultural anthropology and other interesting stuff, and did find a lot of answers, but not really an answer to my question to how to live then. And then I was at a conference organized by Attac back then, and it was a speech by the wonderful Frigga Haug, and she's a elderly lady, a feminist Marxist theoretical thinker. And she's really great. She was old even back then when I was young. And she told about the 4-in-1 perspective. So please Google it if you want. It's really cool, the 4-in-1 perspective. It's about, there's 4 important work, like parts of your life, work that has to be done. Like one is the wage work or the productive work, and you can do it like 4 hours a day. And the second one is care work, and you need to do this because otherwise you won't have something to eat, or your children won't have something to eat, or your mom won't have something to eat. You understand the point. And the third one is like the work for yourself, like to learn things, to enjoy life with your friends, to have a nap, to go to the sea or whatever. And the fourth thing, and this is organizing society and organizing your environment and organizing yourself, like organizing together what is your community and your political life and everything. And this together makes like 4, 8, 12, 16 hours, and then there's 8 hours sleep. Of course, it's a very statistical thing. It's a German model still. But it somehow kicked me like, okay, there's so different things in life to do. And how can I go there? And since then, I think I tried to follow this different direction and to build experience in all of these four parts. And then like slipping a bit out of this normal career and work path and everything. I mean, you can't other than stumble over, for example, environmental problems and economic problems and all of this. But I think if you have the privilege like to step out of this wage work stuff, which a lot of people just can't, but if you can, like just do it, because it opens your mind up for a lot of work there is to be done, and that doesn't get done otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Like, I'm sold. And maybe assuming that some more people are sold as well, where to start? So, like, how can we transform the economy? Maybe this is a very simple question, but if one of you would be chancellor, what are the first 3 steps you take to transform our economy? Or is this even the right way? Or should, other people take the lead on there? Maya, where to start?
Well, I think the one thing that we're skirting around is to accept that there are limits. And the limits to growth report is exactly trying to do that. Never said much about GDP. It was looking at real world trends. So it's looking at the resources we take out, looking at the pollution we put in, the amount of people that are increasing, and then how much food there might be for them. So it was actually looking at key drivers and developments in what we would call our habitat. And then it said, unless we start looking at how those are influencing each other in a feedback loop that is accelerating all of them, to decelerate that, we will have a collision course with that, which is supposedly to be around nowish in the model back then. It's 1970. It was the first time that cybernetics was being done. And it did have this notion of acceleration and then feedbacking tipping point. So it was completely different from all the linear models that were used before. And it was saying, let's stop doing it this way. Let's do different ways of providing energy. Let's look at how much energy do we really need for living well. And that is a notion that we don't have so far. So even now, right? Yes, and even if we were to say, let's decouple everything, brilliant. But first, let's put the cap on how much is there, because that will be the incentive for everybody to look at the solutions that work without running through the cap constantly. But as long as we're skirting around or putting the cap, we can't just say, oh yeah, but we're going to decouple. Yeah, but what from? I mean, CO2 emissions is the one and only thing. We've gone towards a budget. So as natural scientists, we're saying, if we want to have this staying stable, then we're going to have a budget which we can't exceed in CO2 equivalent. But we haven't done it anywhere else. And we're still not at all, even though our Court of Justice, our Constitutional Court, has come in to say, if you're holding these goals, there is a budget. This one is really a numerical thing. You can do the math, how much you have to do today in order to be there in 20 years. All your measures are not living up to doing that math. Go back to the drawing board. I mean, that's A1. And that was the notion of follow the science when we're talking about the natural sciences. And then from that, we start talking about social sciences and we start talking about getting along with the limits. And this is where we haven't been good. We've tried to skirt around talking about distribution because we said there would be a growing pie eternally. So it would be a temporary holding down, a temporary accepting that others get more because you were promised to get more too. And we have to come to face each other in our willingness to be less comparing and more sharing. Yeah. And that is something that no political party has a lot of appetite for.
Yeah, that's one of my questions I wanted to ask later. Like, okay, well, this sounds really good to me right now, but we're actually pretty far from this. So, like, even the German Green Party advertises green growth, and to me, it looks like the other parties don't even bother to look into it and think about post-growth ideas. So, how to change that? Any hints on that?
From the scientific part, we can just keep on going and saying there are those, and you have an obligation to do them because you have made the commitments. I mean, you can say they're all woolly and this and that, but there are the SDGs out there. So at least there's a normative reference framework. And then obviously there's goal 8 with the oxymoron in it of sustainable growth. And then you can say, okay, let's do the science. Let's look at the evidence-based. As you mentioned, we haven't had decoupling in that degree at all. And it doesn't look like there's much GDP growth to be expected in countries with very saturated markets anyway. So secular stagnation, another term, where we're coming into the economics itself crashing on itself because it doesn't work anymore. So there are lots of warning signs where you'd say a risk aversion commitment, and that's Ordnungspolitik 101 in Germany. You can say this. It is the duty of the government to avoid risk and threat to the functioning of its society. We're at that point. The evidence is there. Yeah. And then it's not ideological, it's just factual. And how we then negotiate what is our accepted way to go forward.
Even the World Economic Forum is saying so for years now. So,
yeah, Yeah, but how we manage to have better conversations on this, how we manage to get everybody on board, I think has a lot to do with the fear of there not being a collective answer. So we don't trust in there being a solution that societies would care for everyone. And this is why the urge of trying to have enough for yourself so you feel not too much at risk if the shit hits the fan, that is a very negative feedback loop in our culture and society. So the massive focusing on individualism, the talk about we're all selfish creatures anyway, if I don't do this, someone else will do this, it's everywhere. And it's the most pronounced in spaces, talking about culture, talking about education, where successful, competitively successful, especially males, work under a lot of privilege. How often I hear that, but humans are just like that way. Mm-hmm. And then it's okay to kind of feel less bad about your own privileges. And that's anecdotal evidence. I want to do it more systematically. But I think I have had so many conversations recently, exactly as you said. Do you really feel like you're that kind of person? Or is that just closing a fear gap in you? But it's hard to get the conversations down to that level. It's certainly not in the political space. So we have to have the pre-political or pre-party spaces as well where we have such conversations.
Andrea, you're teaching transformation design. So like, where do you see a lever, how to start, where to start, or where do you see beginnings maybe?
Now I thought I would have 3 wishes as chancellor also. But
yeah, if you have, no, that's a good start. So.
Yeah, well, I agree, of course, to everything you said. And I think like concrete measures, something like a socio-ecological tax reform could do a lot, or like cutting a lot of subventions that would help so much, because all these fossil industries, I mean, they are fueled by our taxpayers' money. Actually, they couldn't live if they wouldn't be given so much money by a lot of states from around the world. It's really like our politics consciously like gives money to these destroying industries, which is really, I mean, not very wise, as you said before. But yeah, given the fact that no party really addresses these problems, I mean, not only in Germany, but also in a lot of other countries, I think what really is at stake here is that there are interests. I mean, there are interests of the people you mentioned, like with a lot of privileges, like the urban middle classes, but also, of course, the rich, the very rich people who are other people. They have an interest in going on destroying this planet. And it's, I think, up to us, like with us, I mean like a very broad coalition of people like the single mom living at a big street here in Berlin in a small flat and having all these emissions coming to her and her child every day, you know, like people living like that. Migrant workers, like a lot of people who are not having profits from this kind of economic system. I mean, this is the majority worldwide who are really fucked up by this kind of system, because they work in the mines, they work at some shitty informal jobs. I mean, this is most people, and I think it's really about interests and about articulating these interests and about articulating them even louder and louder and louder, because they won't be heard otherwise. And what this means, I also don't know, but I think we need very strong social movements, and there are, you know, and also like going together, the feminist movements, the queer movements, the Black Lives Matters movements, the ecological movements, really saying, but what we need now is what the author Eva von Redeker put so nicely, a revolution for life. Mm-hmm. Because it won't come voluntarily, because the people in power, they won't give it to us, because they profit from what is here.
Can I say 2 things? I think I would love to extend your idea about the tax reform, because I think one of the obligations of a new government should be to have transparency about the steering effects of the status quo. Because what we currently always see is that every change in policy framework has to argue for its consequences under benchmarks that have brought us into the mess where we are. And so to say, look, don't say anything there's free markets or independent or fair and government shouldn't meddle. Everything is completely institutionalized and everything has a strong steering effect, both in the social tricking up right now and in the, as you said, the subvention support systems driving us into the wrong direction. So have a transparency about this so you can have package deals. Because it's more easy if you can find package deals where everybody wins a bit and wins a bit more when you need more, but also loses some. And I would really urge us not to go into othering. I noticed that when you said them and we have to them and they benefit from destroying the planet, I think people are caught in their own peer groups. They're caught in their own ways of how things are done in the places where they are. This is what I was trying to express. It's a totally normal way of looking at the world when you're in those kind of areas. Yes, confrontation with a different worldview. But to say you want to pillage our planet, I don't think in the essence they want to. It is about sharing. It is about invitation. It's about saying, no, this is crossing boundaries. So I'm with you there. But I think we always have to keep open the hand of saying, and you can be part of it. Too much othering has not got on us in very good places history-wise.
Do you want to react on that?
Yeah, it's a bit fun because it depends a bit on the panel. Like I also had the part you did say now. Like, so I totally understand the position. I think nobody is born like, I want to destroy the planet. No, of course not. But I think still we can't like wait for people to have inner processes and see about their privileges, and then say voluntarily, "Oh yes, true. I was doing a lot of bad things, and I will stop now making this profit for this fossil fuel company." Also, because it's not a personal decision of this person being CEO at this company, but it's a kind of in the structure of this very enterprise. It has to make profit, because if the CEO doesn't make profit, like another CEO comes. And so, of course, we have to change the structures. And for changing the structures, we need humans who do it. And we need to pressure the humans who could do it.
No, I think the no is a very, very important one. And also cutting through bullshitting. We've got so much bullshitting going on. It's still, I mean, all the invitations to, can you speak on the mega trend sustainability? No, as long as you call it a mega trend, you haven't gotten the point.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to come and speak to you. But this can be done in a way of completely saying they're there forever and they're the problem forever, or it is about, yeah, I don't know. Now I'm getting all Buddhist, but my Buddhist teachers were always saying the no and the sword is a very key ingredient to really be able to defend a certain position, but do it without aversion. So be clear on the no, but don't pull out, putting down the other person for who they are. It's a more, I don't know. In personal conversations, I think it works quite well, but it also works on panels. You can say very friendly to them and say, oh, yes, I know we're really, really with you mobility people now, auto industry, you're all mobility, aren't you? The infrastructure is not there, so too bad. We have to build loads and loads of more cars for now because we can't really do this to people. Fine, but what has your company done in the recent years to enable an alternative strategy from an auto-based one to emerge? Not much, has it? Can you be transparent on your lobbying right now? If you want to be part of the change towards a mobility system, stop lobbying for an auto-based individual system. So either you're with us, and then we do the stepwise changes, or you stop bullshitting with us because you're going to say something totally different behind the closed doors where you're invited to and we're not. You can say those kinds of things without telling someone that they're going to... Yeah, so then you're on the structure point, and it's very important to point that out and to confront them with that, because it's happening all the time. So the corporate Political responsibility is one thing I've been bringing out again and again and again. I think the reporting should have a chapter on a transparency chapter on what was your position in lobbying in the last 10 years. So lobby registers, lobby this, lobby that. Because it's always, yeah, we would do more, but that regulation doesn't come around. We would do, but those don't. And then they make everything they can. I've been in Brussels for 2 years to ensure that the regulation won't come around. And this is, but it's interesting because I try to figure out within bigger corporations whether those people hate each other within the corporation, the sustainability people and the ones that are doing the lobbying, or whether they're shaking hands and saying, slacker, nicely done. Yeah. And I think that's also something we need to find out, because either the culture there is so corrupted and so brazen that we have to confront even more, or we can help the ones that are actually trying to move the defectors.
Okay, we're kind of running out of time, and we wanted to have some questions. So there I see some arms. You can just like one to this one and one to the other already, that we just save some time. Yeah, you can start.
Thanks. I was thinking about, do you see a realistic chance that these ideas are being like crowdsourced, like all the people sitting here and have the ideas, and like you said, step into conversations and say, do you really think this is a long-running good idea? If all we people would go to our personal conversations and people, would this change something? Like, for example, Luisa Neubauer said, we need more political activism, like we have to change political statements and positions. I see that, yes, but could we, like you said, kickstart it by doing it in our communities, with our people? Is it realistic, or is it like we feel better with the problems we can't solve completely?
That's a good question. I wanted to ask that at the end. Like, what can everybody who's sitting there and being fed up seeing all this do when he walks out of Republica? Do you have an answer to this? Any hints? No, just like answer, and you can maybe just go to the next person. Okay. So just start.
I mean, I think it's it's always a bit hard to say the only thing, but it's a really good thing to do that. Yes, of course. I mean, because everybody of you sitting here and of us sitting here, we have a lot of agency to create, and we have a lot of relationships, and we are dependent on a lot of people. A lot of people are dependent on us, and we have such a big influence, like what we do with our lives. If, as I said before, we want to spend like 8 hours awake each day, like selling our time literally to maybe some company destroying the planet, or if we do some like helpful things with our time, like cooking a meal or convincing some politicians to do otherwise, or helping people came as refugees to this country to struggle along, or whatever. I mean, millions of things to do. And I think like things won't change if we don't change. And I see really the change coming much more from the communal level, from the municipalities. There's a lot of cities, a lot of villages who are really dedicated to change their infrastructures, to change their relationships. And such a lot of people being there in the small bureaucracies can make such a big difference. And if all these people, if we all would use this kind of agency we have, a lot would change.
Yeah, we're all, there's a German term that's called Wirklichkeit, right? I love it. Hans-Peter Dürr is astrophysicist, and they're these quantum people, right? They're all about energy floating and material matter, and only composition, a temporary one of crazy shit beyond me. But it's really fascinating because it comes back to everything is energy. And you are energy everywhere you go. you can ask the kind of questions, and you can point out to the things that you heard, and you can ask people what's their motivation for things, and you can make proposals. And I've been witnessing recently a lot of people are sitting on the fence. I think we are stuck in 3 unbelieved stories, and they've been collapsing all over us, and increasingly the people that are repeating those 3 stories are losing all trust. So it becomes very clear party or clientele politics. And one is, yes, we can easily decouple growth from environmental impact. It's just not believed by anybody anymore that looks into the data. And if they say that, and you say, fascinating, really, that'd be brilliant. Can you show me the study that proves this? That'd be wicked. So interested to learn. I haven't found it yet. Can you tell me? Right? Just flip it around. And the other one is, it's going to trickle down. Right? So right now we see that again. It's a breach point in German politics that we're going to look at now. The same story, if we're just going to not tax the ones that already have, they're going to invest, they're going to create the jobs. They're not. They're asset inflating. They're buying things that are already there to possess it, to earn rent and income from it. Rational, but not at all close to the story anymore. Very empirically proven. So again, it's a broken story. And the ones, you can point it out. And again, say, I haven't seen evidence. I really would love for you to show me that that's true, because it sounds really cool. And the third one is, what's good for finance is good for the rest of the economy. Beyond. And there, I think that would be my biggest wedge, where we can combine to really bring in the real economy, the ones that are actually producing value, and tell that they want to have other benchmarks of what's a valuable company. They want to be able to show what's their positive impact in social environmental terms. And there are these search processes. So they are a bit buffered against the investor ideas about needing a lot of financial return very quickly, including tech startups. Venture capital is not, in the most places, not the ones that are going to bring out sustainable business models from the core. Because if you have to grow so fast, so quickly, you're going to lose on either of the fronts, either environmental or social. It's very hard to bring them together if you have to be that quick and disrupt so quickly into a market. Or you're just going to add a little solution item, like an electronic scooter that floats in the spree, right? So you haven't really solved the mobility problem as such. But you've become rich. And now either you have the choice to invest into looking at it systemically, which is fantastic that a lot of those entrepreneurs are doing that, and say, I've understood a single product's not going to do it. I'm going to look bigger. I'm going to be a Wirk in Wirklichkeit. Having effect. Wirken is a German term of having effect. And you have that wherever you go. Whether you behave in a certain way or not, you're having an effect on others.
Okay, so now we're really running out of time, so I would just clap it first. Just to collect some questions. You already have a microphone, so you start and you just like look for the other guys. There was one as well, and then we just like have short questions and try to answer them as quick as possible. Or maybe the other one starts.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I'm Leon, and I co-founded with a great group of people Donut Berlin, which tries to downscale the idea of donut economics, so sort of a healthy donut for us.
Something where you could join and work.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a bit, in terms of the narrative, it's a bit opposite to degrowth, because degrowth is a very sort of negative definition of the future. And we've spoken a lot about like problems and sort of demystifying narratives and so on. I think I would like to hear your sort of positive outlook, your positive story of the future that can sort of mobilize the left in a sort of, strong way, the way that neoliberalism has in the 17th and 80s and so on. So my question would be sort of, what are sort of positive transformation nuggets or sort of examples, stories, places in a nutshell where you see sort of this positive imaginary and this positive vision already taking place today?
Thank you. We try again.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lovis. Thanks for being here. I got 2 questions. Number one is just briefly been touched. It's about cities. What can a city like Berlin, for example, do? For me, degrowth is such more difficult to reach than even the tiny steps of sustainability that have been here. And number 2 is about the election in Australia. Is that some kind of guiding symbol? Is it getting better anyhow in terms of what we've discussed before? Thanks.
Okay, and we just like have 2 more questions collected here, and then we, yep, there. Yeah, the 2 of them. Just start with anyone. Okay.
Okay. I think post-growth or degrowth will not work within the capitalist system. You told so. So what would be the concrete 2-3 steps in the next 5 years to overcome or at least tame the system? How we can organize the necessary social majority?
Okay, I see how difficult it gets to answer all these questions in like a few minutes, but just try last.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, I'm Pablo, and I'm wondering, let's say we convinced 80-90% of the population to about degrowth, and that everyone says, yeah, that's our goal, let's go there. I'm wondering how can the transition be, because we're living in an economy that depends on growth, and all our social systems are financed by growth, education, health, and also retirement. And I think, how can we not let it become a total chaos when we stop, when we change, or we turn this growth into a degrowth? I think that's a really difficult thing I didn't figure out, and would be really interesting to hear your thoughts.
Okay, we have one more question, and then we have to try answering.
So my question is for Maya, because I agree that othering is very problematic, but I've been wondering about it because in this story we clearly have villains. So there's initiatives on the way to make ecocide a crime on par with genocide. And I'm wondering if we don't want to other people, because that leads into very dangerous territory very quickly, how can we still hold the bad guys, the fossil fuel companies, accountable? How do you imagine doing that?
Mm-hmm. So we have very many very complex questions. Maybe you just pick some where you just have like a clear answer now. Want to start?
Mm-hmm. Wenn du jetzt direkt loslegen willst, kannst du auch machen. Mir egal. Soll ich erst? Okay. I do think that it is important, even though it's slow, to have these processes with a kind of framework that is about making people villains officially, right? So that we have a rechtsstaatliche idea behind it. And obviously you can go further or earlier, because they're always an expression of our moral base in a society. I've worked with lawyers on making crimes against future generations a case under the International Criminal Court, and was very, very intense learning for me to understand how our way of law is working and how you have to make the causalities very easily from one to the other, and to have to prove the impact it has on an individual in proportion to the actions held by another one. So there is this long leash in terms of making it a criminal thing, and this is why ecocide was a different way of looking at it. And I think it's a very good one to really say it can't be something that you buy yourself out of anymore, because that is a shift in they call the mens rea. So once you have enough evidence and knowledge about the impacts of your actions, you still pursue them because you can afford them, then you're becoming liable to having to live up to the consequences and not buy yourself out of anymore, which we had under civil law. And this is why I think the criminal law aspect is super important there, also to start a conversation. And then you can start that conversation with someone and still allowing them to come into the space of saying, okay, maybe I get it. Maybe I'd like to come on the other side. And not make them eternally be part of this. But yes, to be outspoken. If you're investing in those companies right now, because they're having huge shares right now, obviously you're helping them. And then there's a lot of rhetoric saying, oh yeah, but we're dependent. You see this on the energy right now. Yes, but we could also just cut down using so much energy as a change. So the notion of how much do we need, and people buying big cars and then being struck by the prices that it costs to fuel them up. There is a certain degree of self-responsibility, not just dumping that on everybody else. I think for me, it's mostly a matter of talking about the agreements, because I think it works, because you always can show that you're in a relationship in one way or the other, and then we can talk about the agreements that one would wish in a society to hold, and then you're not too much in the culprits. But when the agreements say there's certain behavior that we're going to rule out from being acceptable, fine, it's their choice again, if they want to go in there, no, but then we're going to call it out. And that's the duty of a society that says we're holding true to the things that we say we want to achieve. So it's, yeah, maybe I'm a bit too scientific in some of those places, but I've felt it allowed for me to have conversations in a different way. Because it's the contracts which make us be able to collaborate. And one would wish that others are holding to the contracts as well in a society that they like to live in, feel safe in. And then you can have these conversations on a we level, rather than you and I are battling out who's doing the right or wrong thing. And in maybe trying to combine two of those points, I've noticed a lot that I would love for us, and this is why I try to avoid the term growth or no growth, to really say what would we like to have more of, what would we like to let go of, and what we'd like to overcome and what we'd like to achieve. And in systems science or in complex systems, it's what is the next possible step in the direction that we call desirable. And this is why I think the working with the backcasting with this is the future that we want, and these are the steps that we might come to unlock the lock-ins, which also makes clear that right now the system is broken as it is, and if we change it, a lot can emerge from what we're saying is positive and takes us a step further, and that gives us more courage to dare the next thing. So it's always a process thing for me, a learning thing for me, and yes, with a compass where we say, this is good, I want more of that. And this is, no, I haven't liked it for a long time. So let's just stop it. What do you need to stop this and have more of that? It's very, I think it has to become very concrete in the particular spaces. This is why it's great that the frameworks are being developed in or with people at place, because exactly these feelings are, and observations are always slightly different in each space. But it is, for me, this notion of more of, that can be the pull factor, because it is quite broken right now, and people do sense it.
Andrea, what do you say?
Well, I think maybe also to this question of positive vision. I think yes, we need those examples, but also I think it is very, very important that we first acknowledge like the mess we are in. It's not like just something's going a bit wrong or a bit in a wrong direction or whatever, but it's really like we're at a point in history where nobody really exactly knows how to go further, because it's a lot of path dependencies, a lot of locked-in systems, and it's really like a threat to a lot of people and a threat to life on Earth, basically, and really to sit with that and let it sink in. I think this is so important, not to go for false solutions. And then, of course, if you want to look up like what people do in the here and now, I can recommend several websites. For example, the Oya magazine I am working for. I will spell it in German because all the articles are also in German. The website is oya-online.de. And Oya is written O-Y-A. And there will be soon a new website out called Was können wir tun.jetzt. It's from the Network of Economic Transformation. And there's a lot of examples what people can do now, especially in the field of commoning and commons, like creating income and produce things outside of the market. And I think this is something we can do also in the next 5 years. To your question, like how to get a bit more into a post-capitalist direction is like to stop doing capitalism each day, just in our lives, in our work life, in our private life, and to try to organize around commons, which is outside of the market. And there is a very good also German website concentrating on CSX, which means community-supported everything, like the way you can organize enterprises in another way than around the market, after the example of community-supported agriculture. And this I really recommend to you. Think about legal structures and how to do your business in another way. It really is, it helps also yourself to get out of this necessity to reproduce capitalism each morning.
we really, unfortunately, have to stop right now, but I thank you for all the questions. I thank you for being here and trying to inspire change. And as I am, as moderator, am able to say the closing words, I just want to use the opportunity again and say, okay, change won't happen if people don't do change. And everybody, if you can just like walk out and tomorrow start doing something that is bigger than your own household and just try to change and live this up now. And so thank you for your attention.